Hello, I'm live apparently, and just about to do the reading for tonight for Wine and a Book and Indie Author Week UK 2026. All about celebrating independent authors and being free of having to prove who we are, at least to a publisher. We just have to prove who we are to anybody who wants to buy our books, which is greeting and meeting the actual real people who buy them, which is lovely. So, and it's now 6 o'clock. So, good evening. It is Wednesday still. Yes. Sorry, had a slightly bizarre thing happened at lunchtime where I lost my car key, and thanks to my lovely friend Tracy and Marek, it was possible to go and find my key and get back. So a bit flustered, not as properly prepared as I should be. So apologies for stumbles, which will be inevitable. Anyway, so welcome to Wine and a Book, Books and Landscape. My name is Amanda Davey, and this is a live reading from a piece that I wrote related to a book. And I'm going to wish you lots of health, wealth, happiness, and entertainment, and particularly Tracy, Marek, and Karen because she's got poorly tooth. So, the book in question is In the Landscape, my tome on 273 churches, chapels, and ruined places of worship in the South Downs National Park. I've been doing all sorts of videos on the themes that have cropped up. So this is a related to that. On the back of the work that I've done, I have rejoined the British Cartographic Society rather too many years late because it was a wonderful, it still is a wonderful organisation for anybody interested in maps, modern and old. And having been a map curator in my younger days, it took a while to wake up to the fact it's actually very reasonable if you're a single individual human being rather than a corporate. Right, so the magazine, this is the membership magazine. It is called Maplines, obviously, because that's in big capitals. And they put my Idsworth photograph on the cover, which was rather splendid when it came up on the mat. And it's all about some of the, well, it's not all about, it's some of the nuggets that relate to having done work on the tithe maps, which will become apparent in the reading. So here goes. In 2014, a small project visiting churches, chapels, and ruined places of worship as a way of finding new places within the South Downs National Park rapidly morphed into working on a book. With 273 plus sites involved, so there's actually 271 entries, but there are several sites that are mentioned above and beyond the entries or incorporated into the entries. Not all are within the national park, actually, to be fair, but most are, and there are some that are just sort of nudging on the outside. It was daft to think of using tithe maps to augment the research because a tithe map is on a parish by parish basis, so that would arguably have meant about 200 tithe maps to get poor old archivists to get out. That would have driven them insane, and probably me too. But a colleague told me about the genealogist website, and with the Diamond membership, you get access to the copies that were made by the National Archive. Yeah, the National Archive. So the government copies, the less pretty ones. The pretty ones are in the record offices, but I don't care. I wanted the information. My entire career has been about maps, and this was as good as Christmas when I was given my first bicycle, and that was very exciting. Every site covered by a tithe map now had a chance for more. I've spent the last 4 years chasing down rabbit holes with the added help of the National Library of Scotland website and the Ordnance Surveyor's Notebook drawings, known as OSDs. Old maps included Isaac Taylor's 1759 Hampshire and Yeakel Gardner and Groom's 1795 Sussex. Old routes were fun to chase up, but the enticing part of it was what I hadn't predicted when I began. Another source was archaeological reports, tending to be focused locally as a result of funding. The Mills Study Group published a study of windmills rammed on posts through the centre of Bronze Age barrows. Other archaeologists investigate why the centre of barrows was excavated, but the OSDs often show windmills still present on the top of the scarp, which could be very instructive when it is all pieced together. Now, these are going to be very, very difficult to see. But yeah, they're very shiny in nearly sunshine, and that doesn't really show it very well. There is a windmill on there. That's from the OSD at Wilmington, showing the windmill on the top of the Bronze Age barrow there. Researching one place at a time is akin to viewing a ship in a bottle. They are separated, and things that happen seem focused on them with less of a link to elsewhere. Some patterns were confirmed by doing so many, while new insights came as well. In East Meon, Hampshire, the tithe map and its apportionment of 1851, quite late for tithe maps, more on tithe maps comes in a second, identified the Reverend Thomas Cook Kemp as the rector. He turned out to be focused on self-interest rather than spiritual considerations. His demands for payments in an era of agricultural poverty and riots, and his attempts to claim for turnips and their toppings separately, triggered what was called the Tithing of Turnips Act of 1835. It is no coincidence that the Tithe Commutation Act of 1836 followed the next year, which also initiated these historically valuable maps, taking approximately 20 years to complete. Now, it wasn't the only reason why the Tithe Commutation Act was done, but it did accelerate it. At Idsworth, on the Hampshire-Sussex border, this gorgeous church, the little church on the hill above what was then the manor house is marked on the 1838 tithe map with Reverend Samuel Clark Jervois as Lord of the Manor, but not the incumbent. The planned railway is shown in pencil because there is a railway that runs below the church. Tradition has it that his lordship got fed up with the railway and flounced off, building a fancy new house to the south on higher ground. However, by this time, Jervois was living in London. His son was doing his best to live in the damp ancient manor house. There are quite a few damp ancient manor houses that cropped up across the South Downs near the churches, some of which don't exist anymore. His son was doing his best to live in the damp ancient manor house. Repeat. That's me repeating. This is a blip because I'm tired. The railway brought him the money and incentive to build on ground that was not going to be damp. It was rough for the village that had relied on work at the big house. Yeah. So there's a photograph showing the railway line below the church. And while we're about it, that is East Meon Church, which is a fabulous, fabulous church. Sorry, I was probably blocking the microphone. The tithe also threw a raking light on some scandals. At Woolbeeding, Sussex, the incumbent was the Reverend John Bouverie, living in the rectory. Woolbeeding House was owned by Sir Henry Frederick Bouverie and Charles George Beauclerk, Esquire, as trustees under the will of the late Lord Robert Spencer. The occupier was the Honourable George Ponsonby. Lord Spencer had married Harriet Bouverie after her husband, Edward Bouverie, died. She was Sir Henry and Reverend John's mother. Her daughter, Diana Bouverie, had inherited, according to gossip, because she was Lord Spencer's daughter. She was married to George Ponsonby. At South Stoke came another tale of marital disharmony when the Reverend William Wagelin was in the parsonage. His son was the artist John Wagelin, while his daughter was the scandalous Lady Smith. He had kicked his wife out of the vicarage while pregnant and divorced her on the grounds of adultery. He was then able to marry a less flamboyant wife. He actually had the marriage annulled, which allowed him to marry again, based on the fact that she'd not really been his wife properly. The son was from the second wife, not the scandalous mummy. Looking at the map for the parsonage in Kingsworthy, just outside the national park, raises odd questions. Maybe a deal between neighbouring lords of the manor. The parish boundary jutted out to envelop the parsonage house, which was small and unassuming. The building extended has survived. So this is, it's not going to be very easy to see it, but you should be able to just see a funny little bit that just goes like that, where the parish boundary just accommodated this ancient cottage, and it's just incredible. Anyway, tithe maps were not drawn to be pretty, and most held by the genealogist are far from pretty, as I've said. They are the government record copies. Prettier versions can be found in county record offices, etc., and can be exciting monsters to study in their original form, and, being habitually rolled, a bit of a struggle to keep flat, although they do have a lot of digital copies themselves these days. Sometimes surveyors had already done local estate plans and might get more adventurous with the style. At Stansted Park in Sussex, the symbols used for the forest areas imply wood pasture, whereas more recent mapping shows the mixed woodland of today. By 1875, the infilling had begun with increasing conifers. So that's the tithe map for Stansted, with the wonderful avenues crisscrossing. Then that's the 1875 map, I think. No, that's just another one from the genealogist site. These are layers of showing. So that would have been 1895, I think, that particular map. Are geo-rectified air photographs classed as maps? They do provide useful information. One of my first jobs was interpreting archaeological crop marks from specialist air photographs. It was good to discover that smaller scale Google Earth imagery could show features helpful for a candidate for the smallest church in the country at Lullington, Sussex. Not illustrated, I don't think. No, not illustrated. On a hillside above the River Cook Mill with a few houses nearby, the 2006 photography shows clearly old fields and house platforms for what would have been a larger settlement. If the scope of a project allows for studying original documents, those are to be preferred, but I suspect I will be harvesting themes from this work for a good number of years because I was able to do things that hadn't seemed possible when it all began. Those digital, having access to those digital maps was just complete and utter bliss. That just not every parish has a map. Not every area in a parish is covered by maps. So the wonderful church at Corhampton in Hampshire, that doesn't have a map. Not the whole of Corhampton and the deserted village of Loma also, there is no mapping. St Cross outside Winchester, hardly any of that area is mapped. It's sort of forgotten. A lot of Lewes is not mapped. A lot of Chichester, actually, there aren't any maps. So it's not complete coverage, but the maps are line drawings largely, unless they're prettified, with parcel numbers, and for each parcel, the landowner was given, the occupier was given, field names were often given. That's a wonderful historian's research tool. Size was given, but I tend to ignore that. And the actual use is given. So if a furze field would be a sort of scrubby field that had gorse on it that they used to cut for bedding. Woodland, but you'd also have waste. Waste could still be woodland, but it wouldn't be economically viable. It was classed as waste on occasion. Sometimes it's classed as wood. So that wouldn't be very. It's instructive, but not helpful sometimes when looking at ancient woodland to try and justify whether it is ancient or not, because waste is still has the potential to be just non-economic woodland and therefore classified outside woodland, because of course the tithe maps were so that it was possible to calculate the tithe payable to the church incumbent, the patron, and whoever held the advowson, which was quite often quite a big organisation like the diocese, or quite a few of the Oxbridge colleges. Their endowments were funded by the advowsons that they held for portions of the tithe. So the difference between a rector, a vicar, and a curate is how much of the tithe they actually get. So a rector gets most, the patron gets quite a bit, but the rector gets most. The vicar gets a proportion, doesn't get everything, and a curate just gets a fee, and is very often paid for out of what a rector or a vicar would be earning. I think so there's a lot of information, but when you have a church, the church is actually quite often the church is just the church, but the parsonage, that will tell you who's living in the parsonage. Sometimes it's not actually the incumbent. The incumbent's living in another grander house because they were of a different sort of social strata to a lot of the incumbents that we have in the modern day, where it's more vocational and less something that the well-off lower children ended up by doing. Anyway, that's a quick rampage through tithe maps, sort of introduction, and thank you very much for joining me. Tomorrow night is another very different piece that I have written for Maplines. It's not published and out yet, so there won't be a cover, but is all to do with lichens and lichen mapping as part of the research that I've been doing to insert into my late husband's book on Dr. Francis Rose, who was very important in the mapping of lichens and looking at them in regard to air pollution in the days of acid rain, as well as being a very highly revered and respected and influential natural historian and author of the still very heavily used Wildflower Key, which helps people learn how to recognize plants. So completely different background, but still a core of mapping and still to do with the landscape. So wishing you all the very best of health, wealth, happiness and entertainment, and good night. Thank you.